Welcome everybody in YouTube land. I'm the Opossum at Gettin Nerdy MTG. Today we got a little deck tech for you. I'll go ahead and say up front, I did not build this. This is actually courtesy of a good friend, Daniel. Daniel built Derevi Emprial Tactician. This is actually a brew out of his own sick and twisted and evil mind. But Derevi Emprial Tactician is a green, a white, and a blue. He's a 2/3 flyer that when he enters the battlefield or a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, tap or untap a permanent. It does specifically say target permanent, so hexproof, shroud, that kind of stuff, negates that effect. But what makes this commander particularly heinous, the activated ability for 1 plus green, white, blue, put them on the battlefield from the command zone. That's not a cast. You just pay the mana and it is so. Commander tax no longer affects you with this guy. For the most part, I'm going to say this is an equipment deck. Ideally played as a Voltron deck. We're going to suit up Derevi and break through specifically for commander damage. For those of you that don't play commander, don't know what I'm talking about. Normal 60 card Magic, you start out at 20 life. And it's played one-on-one, typically. With commander, you start out with 40 life. And it is a group typically of 4 people. Obviously, you can have more, you can have less, but a quote-unquote normal pod is 4. So looking at it that way, in Commander, you have 120 points of damage to do to win the game. Before, 3 people combined do 40 points to you. Commander damage, instead, you cut that down to 21. Also, life gain doesn't matter. You can be at, 1 million life. But if you take 21 points of damage for a single given commander, you are dead and out of the game. So pump Derevi up, swing in for, in some cases, lethal with 1 shot, given the equipments that are in this deck. Anyway, Derevi's our commander. In the deck, there are 10 creatures. 3 of them are just straight up mana dorks. Starting those off, we have Birds of Paradise. 1 green to cast. It's an 0/1 flyer, but what's important is you tap it for a mana of any color. We've also got a Noble Hierarch, a green for an 0/1. Tap it for green, white, or blue. So basically any color this deck needs. Also has Exalted, so if a creature you control attacks alone, that creature is going to get +1/+1. This type of deck you will frequently be attacking with just the commander. Or another single creature that's got a bunch of equipment on it. We've got the oldie but goodie, Land of War Elves, a green mana. It's a 1/1. Tap it to add a green mana. I wanted to say at the beginning, with the deck techs I've done for decks I've built, since there are typically some premium printings in there, I show you 2 prices throughout the video. Typically the price at the top of the screen is if I'm using a specific printing. I'll show you the price of that, and then at the bottom it will have the market value of the cheapest printing of said card available. I'm not going to bother with that this time, just kind of in the spirit of how Daniel builds decks. If he purchases a copy of any card, it doesn't matter what it is, if he has to actually source out and locate a given card, he wants the cheapest copy available. Any of the premium copies he has in this deck are just because he happens to own them from opening packs, playing events, that kind of thing. So every copy, every price that I show for this video is going to be for the cheapest printing of that card. It may not be for the version of the card that we're showing you. At the end of the video, you'll see the market value for this deck list using the cheapest printings that exist. Little aside that concludes your public service announcement. Into continuing on with our creatures, got a Phyrexian Metamorph for 3 and blue Phyrexian. This can come out a little quicker because the Phyrexian means if you don't want to pay a blue mana, you can pay 2 life instead. So doing that, this card would be, or this creature would be cast for 3 generic mana and 2 life. It's commander, you start out with 40. But it's a 0/0 that you can have it enter the battlefield as a copy of any artifact or creature on the battlefield. Except it will also be an artifact if the original was not. Got Stoneforge Mystic. I'm going to quit picking up the rest of the deck. Stoneforge Mystic. This is a tutor. A very helpful tutor for this deck. For 1 and a white, it's a 1/2. That's irrelevant. It's not in here to attack, but when it enters the battlefield, search your library for an equipment card. Any equipment card in this deck. There are quite a few of those. Reveal it, put in your hand, then shuffle. It's also kind of ramp of sorts. It's equipment ramp. For 1 and a white, you can tap Stoneforge Mystic, put an equipment card from your hand on the battlefield. So this enters, you go find any equipment you want in the deck, and then on any given turn, for basically 2 mana and tapping this creature, you put an equipment in your hand onto the battlefield. Lots of equipments in this deck cost more than 2 mana to cast. Said I was going to quit picking those up. Eternal Witness. This is Graveyard Recursion. For 1, green. It's a 2/1, enters the battlefield, return a target card from your graveyard to your hand. So they managed to get something of yours off the battlefield. Eternal Witness enters, and you get it back. Let's see. Crashing Drawbridge. For 2 mana, 2 generic. It's an 0/4 with Defender, so you're not attacking with it. But you can tap Crashing Drawbridge, give all of your creatures haste until end of turn. So Derevi just came down because somebody killed it. You tap Drawbridge, Derevi attacks that turn. Spellskite, 2 generic. It's an 0/4. Again, you are not attacking. That's not what this creature is for. But for Phyrexian, which we discussed earlier, you can either pay a blue or 2 life. Change a target of target spell or ability to Spellskite. This is protection for one of your other. Actually, you change anything that could target a creature. So if the spell says any target, you can change said target to Spellskite. They're about to kill one of your permanents, either your commander or something else you've got on the field. You pay a blue or 2 life, and they kill Spellskite instead. Ulamog's Crusher. And this is a big old Eldrazi. 8 mana for an 8/8. Attacks each combat if able, but the important part is Annihilator 2. Ulamog's Crusher attacks. The player you're attacking, or that it's attacking, has to sack 2 of its permanents. So you're going to thin out the board a little bit. We've got a Midnight Guard for 2 and a white. It's a 2/3. Another creature enters the battlefield, untap Midnight Guard. This actually goes infinite with a card we'll see here in a little while. Not infinite, you win the game, but it is an infinite combo. You'll see when we get to it. I'll set that card aside just so we can show it again. There are 3 Planeswalkers in the deck. First one we're going to show is Ugin the Spirit Dragon. This is actually one of the nicer printings of this card, but like I said, the copy or the price you're seeing is not for this version, just because Daniel would not buy this version. But in any case, for 8 mana, it's a 7 loyalty Planeswalker. So this is the number of loyalty counters it will enter the battlefield with. It has a +2, deal 3 damage to any target. -X, exile each permanent, converted mana cost X or less, that's 1 or more colors. This can be a board wipe of sorts if you need it to. -10, so the ultimate, which you will, if your opponents have anything to say or do about it, never get to do. But you gain 7 life, draw 7 cards, put up to 7 permanents from your hand on the battlefield. So it is instant board state, if you ever get there. Got another Ugin. In this case, it's Ugin the Ineffable. 6 mana for 4 loyalty. Colorless spells you cast cost 2 less to cast. So there's a lot of artifacts, a lot of equipments in this deck. You can make those much cheaper. That's mainly, I would say that is the main reason this card's in the deck, is that cost reduction. But it's +1, exile top card of your library face down, and look at it. Create a 2/2 colorless spirit. When the token leaves the battlefield, put the exiled card into your hand. It's -3. Destroy target permanent that's 1 or more colors. So it's a little targeted removal. But like I said, the main reason this is in the deck is the colorless spell cost reduction. I've also got Karn Liberated. 7 mana for a 6 loyalty Planeswalker. It's going to tick up fairly quickly. +4, target player exiles a card from their hand. -3, you're going to exile target permanent. -14, restart the game, leaving in exile all non-aura permanent cards exiled with Karn Liberated. Then put those cards onto the battlefield under your control. So game completely starts over. Nobody has anything on the board. You got a bunch of stuff that was exiled by Karn, so you still got some things on the board. The biggest thing is the restarting the game there. There are certain effects in the game that cannot be undone. If you've accumulated poison counters, there's no way to get rid of them unless you restart the game. If your opponents have ultimated Planeswalkers that have given them emblems, like you meant, or earlier we saw the Ugin. That's not the one I was thinking. You don't get emblems with these planeswalkers, so it looks like I'm a rambling idiot. There are planeswalkers that the ultimate, if you ever get there, gives you an emblem that does something. There's a Garrick that the emblem gives all of your creatures +3/+3, and I believe trample. Not being able to get rid of an emblem, it can be problematic for you. This will restart the game so those emblems don't exist. Okay, on to our sorceries. We have 9 sorceries in the deck. I'm calling it 3.5 tutors. First of which being Idyllic Tutor for 2 and a white. Search your library for an enchantment card. Reveal it, put it in your hand, then shuffle. There's not a ton of enchantments in the deck, but there are a few. This lets you go find the best one. For this deck, a much better tutor is still Shaper's Gift. For just a white, search your library for an equipment card. Reveal it, put it in your hand, then shuffle. So for 1 mana, go get the best equipment in the deck. You got a lot to choose from. Got Wargate. Let's see, make sure I hadn't miscount. Wargate for X, green, white, blue. Search your library for a permanent card. Convert a mana cost X or less. Put it into play. Then shuffle. So go get the best card for mana cost of a given value. Put it straight onto the battlefield. Basically says pay an extra 3 mana above whatever the casting cost of the best permanent in your deck is. Go get it and play it. I'm calling this the half of a tutor. Ancient Stirrings for just a green. Look at the top 5 cards of your library. Reveal a colorless card from among them, put it in your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library, any order. I say a half tutor because you're only looking at the top 5 cards. But there's a lot of colorless spells in this deck, so you are likely to have one of those in the top 5. We've got 2 ramp sorceries. Kadama's Reach for 2 and a green. Search library for two basic land cards. Reveal those cards. Put one onto the battlefield tapped, and the other in your hand. So go get 2 basics. One hits the battlefield, the other to hand. If you haven't already played a land, you can then play that land for turn. Got Cultivate for 2 and a green. Search the library for up to 2 basic lands. Put one on the battlefield tapped, other in your hand. Exact same thing as Kadama's Reach. But you can only have 1 Kadama's Reach in the deck because this is Commander. So same exact card, just different title. There are 2 board wipes in the deck. We have Austere Command for 4 white. So a very versatile board wipe. You're going to choose 2. Either all artifacts, all enchantments, all creatures convert a mana cost 3 or less, or all creatures cost 4 or greater. The 2 that you choose are all destroyed. You need all the creatures gone, then choose all creatures big and small. You want to keep your little creatures, then do all creatures 4 or greater and choose either artifacts or enchantments. So whatever's going to help you the best and leave as much of your board state intact as possible. We've got Shatter the Sky for 2 white. Each player that's got a creature with power 4 or greater, draw a card, then destroy all creatures. So if Derevi is suited up and now huge, you'll get to draw a card before you wipe the board. Got a spot removal sorcery, revoke existence. It's 1 and a white, exile target artifact or enchantment. The exile is important because then it's not in the graveyard, it's just gone from existence. Kind of reminds me of one of the Marvel movies, specifically one of the Thor movies, where Loki is pissed off and sends I think they called it a destroyer. There are 3 instants. We've got crop rotation for a green. When you play crop rotation, sacrifice a land. Search a library for a land card, put it into play. So this is definitely not ramp because you've destroyed a land, but it is a tutor. Sack a little land that's not doing you any good or is doing very little for you. Go find the best land in your deck for the given situation you're in. Turn to dusk. Also a single green. Destroy target equipment, then add a green to your mana pool. So it's some spot removal. Warning. For a white, target attacking creature deals no damage in combat this turn. This is a card I would swap out for something else. There are instances that do essentially the exact same thing, only instead of target attacking creature, it prevents all combat damage. So limiting that to 1 creature, unless you're trying to kill that creature by blocking it and not have your creature die. Like I said, I think there's better options for this spot. Into the enchantments, there are 6 enchantments. One of the more expensive of those, we have Shark Typhoon for 5 and a blue. Cast a non-creature spell, create an XX blue shark with flying. So you're going to throw flying sharks at people. Where X is that spell's converted mana cost. There's a lot of non-creature spells in this deck. I mean a lot. So you're going to create a bunch of flying sharks. Or you can pay X plus 1 in a blue, cycle it. So you discard this card and discard this card and draw the top card off your library. But when you cycle Shark Typhoon, create an XX blue shark creature with flying. So cycle it just because you need something else, and you get 1 flying shark. Stasis. Everybody hates this card. This card is evil. Enchantment for 1 and a blue. Each player skips his or her untapped phase. During your upkeep, pay a blue or bury stasis. In case anyone has forgotten, Derevi gives you a means of untapping. So that gives you a way to get around stasis, and your opponents are completely locked out. You said this card is evil. Rest in Peace. This is actually an enchantment I run in my enchantment deck. For 1 and a white. Enters the battlefield, exile all cards from all graveyards. If a card or token would be put into a graveyard from anywhere, exile it instead. This completely shuts down any of your opponents doing graveyard degenerate junk, because their graveyards will no longer exist. Got pacifism. For 1 and a white, enchanted creature cannot attack or block. This one basically says target opponent your creature's god does nothing but sit there. Doesn't kill it, so you put this on a commander that they want to be attacking or blocking with. It's better than killing it, because if you kill it, it goes back to the command zone and they can recast it. This, it's not going to die, it's just going to sit there and not do anything, unless it has static abilities or triggered. If it does anything other than attack or block, those abilities are unaffected. Presence of Gond. This is the other piece to the infinite combo that I mentioned here. Presence of Gond for 2 and a blue, 2 and a green enchant creature. Enchanted creature has tap, create a 1/1 elf warrior. The infinite combo, excuse me, the infinite combo is Midnight Guard, enchanted with Presence of Gond. Tap it, create a 1/1. When that 1/1 enters, Midnight Guard untaps. You can then do it again as many times as you would like. You want 1,000,000 tokens? Make 1,000,000 tokens. Eldrazi Conscription, 8 mana, enchant creature. Enchanted creature gets +10/+10, has trample and Annihilator 2. You're going to make Derevi huge. You're going to give it trample and Annihilator. And the 8 mana cost means nothing if you got Stoneforge Mystic on the board, because then you play this for 2. There are 9 artifacts that are not equipments. Got Arcane Signet, 2 mana, tap to add a mana of any color, commander's color identity, so a little bit of ramp and color fixing. Manalith, 3 mana, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. So also ramp. Skyclave Relic, 3 mana. It has kicker 3. Skyclave Relic is indestructible. When it enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, create 2 tapped tokens that are copies of Skyclave Relic. So for 6 mana, you can get 3 of these on the battlefield. Tap to add 1 mana of any color. Got Well of Lost Dreams, 4 mana. Whenever you gain life, you may pay X, where X is less than or equal to the amount of life you gained. If you do, draw X cards. I don't think there's a ton of life gain in this deck, but there are some equipments that do it. This lets you turn that into card draw. This is straight up card advantage. 4 mana. May look at the top card of your library at any time. You can cast it if it's an artifact or a colorless non-land card. Your planeswalkers qualify as colorless non-land cards in this deck. You can tap it and pay a life to exile the top card of your library. So if you don't like the card that's there, exile it, move on to the next one. Jester's Cap. It's a very beat up copy of Jester's Cap, but I mean, this is from Ice Age. so it's kind of understandable. But for 4 mana, you're going to pay 2, tap and sacrifice the cap, look through your target player's library, remove any 3 of those cards from the game. So I'm going to pay 2, tap and sack this. I'm only going to get to do it once. But I'm going to search your deck, and I'm going to get rid of the best 3 cards in your deck. Darksteel Forge, 9 mana for an artifact. Artifacts you control have indestructible. Like I said, there's a lot of artifacts in this deck. 9 that are not equipment, but all of the equipment are artifacts as well. So it's going to protect your stuff. Lifeline, 5 mana. When a creature is put into a graveyard and a creature is in play, return that creature from your graveyard to play at the end of turn. So as long as you got another creature on the board, your creature that dies keeps coming back. Oh, and actually this, I would have to check some rulings on this because it says creature into a graveyard, but you're going to return the creature from your graveyard to play at the end of the turn. So I don't think you get your opponent's creatures for that. Got a Microsynth Lattice, 6 mana. All permanents are artifacts in addition to other types. All cards that aren't in play, spells, and permanents are colorless. Players may spend mana as though it were mana of any color. With the Darksteel Forge, all of your artifacts are indestructible. Microsynth Lattice says everything's an artifact, so all of your stuff is now indestructible. Now I mentioned that there were 9 artifacts that are not equipments. That's because there are 26 that are equipments. 7 of those are the Sword ofs. Did I count that right? Yes. There are other equipments that the name of the card is Sword of something, but the Sword ofs, or the swords specifically, are typically talking about a specific cycle of equipment. Like I said, there's a whole line of them. I'm going to say they're all 3 mana to cast. They're all 2 mana to equip. So in equipment, you play it onto the field and then you have to equip it, unless the ability says equip it as it enters. Typically, the Sword ofs give the equipped creature +2/+2 protection from 2 colors and have a combat damage trigger. In the case of Sword of Fire and Ice, it's protection from red and blue, and when it deals combat damage to a player, Sword of Fire and Ice deals 2 damage to any target and you draw a card. Sinew and Steel, like I said, all the same stuff, but in this case is protection from black and from red. On combat damage, you destroy up to 1 planeswalker and up to 1 target artifact. Body and Mind, it's protect, like I said, all the same stuff, so I'm not going to keep repeating all of that, but protection from green and blue. Combat damage, you create a 2/2 green wolf, and the target player mills 10 cards. And the player that you're attacking or that you did the combat damage to mills 10 cards. Feast and Famine, gives it protection from black and green. The defending player that took the damage has to discard a card, and you untap all of your lands. This is probably my favorite one as far as abilities on the swords. Truth and Justice, protection from white and blue. And you put a 1/1 counter on a creature you control, then proliferate. So put a 1/1 counter on one of your creatures, and then for every counter that exists in the game, you can choose to add an additional one of that type on whatever it is on. Increase the amount of poison counters, increase your 1/1 counters. If something had -1 counters, everything. Light and Shadow is protection from white and black. You gain 3 life and get to return a creature card from your graveyard to your hand. War and Peace is protection from red and white. Deals damage to the player equal to the number of cards in their hand, and you gain a life for each card in your hand. On to the other equipments. Like I said, this is an equipment deck. We have Whisper Silk Cloak for 3 mana. It's 2 to equip. Equipped creature is unblockable and can't be the target of spells or abilities. So it's unblockable and has Shroud. Batterskull, 5 to cast, 5 to equip, or for 3 mana you can return it to your hand. Has Living Weapon. So in this case, when you play it, if you don't choose to equip it, it basically creates a token out of thin air and then attaches to it. Equipped creature gets +4/+4. It has Vigilance and Lifelink. Commander's Plate, 1 to cast, 3 to equip to your commander, or 5 to equip to any creature other than your commander. Gives it +3/+3 and protection from each color that's not in your commander's color identity. So in the case of this deck with Derevi, it would give it protection from black and red. Sword of Vengeance, 3 to cast, 3 to equip. Gives it +2/+0, first strike, vigilance, trample, and haste. Sword of the Animist, 2 to cast, 2 to equip. Gives it +1/+1. When equipped creature attacks, search the library for basic land, put it on the battlefield tapped. Argentum Armor, 6 to cast, 6 to equip. Gives it +6/+6, and when it attacks, destroy target permanent. Shadow Spear, 1 to cast, 2 to equip. Gives it +1/+1, trample, and lifelink. And for 1 mana, permanents your opponents control lose hexproof and indestructible. Hammer of Nazan, 4 to cast, 4 to equip. When it or another equipment enters, like I said, there are 26 equipments. You may attach that equipment to target creature you control. So we just saw one that had an equip cost of 6. Now cast it, immediately put it on a creature. This also gives a creature +2/+0 and indestructible. Let's see, we already saw Shadow Spear. Blackblade Reforged, 2 to cast, 7 to equip, or to equip to a legendary it's only 3. But with the card we saw earlier, the Hammer, you just pay 2 and equip it. Cast it and immediately equip it. It gives it +1/+1 for each land you control. So you're going to make something huge. Probably Derevi. Locks it on Warhammer. 3 to cast, 3 to equip. Give it +3/+0, trample, and lifelink. Skull Clamp. 1 to cast, 1 to equip, gives it +1/+1, and when equipped creature dies, draw 2 cards. So the combo that we saw in Midnight Guard and Presence of Gone, where you can make infinite 1/1s. Now you can pay 1 mana, equip said one of the 1/1s, it will die, you'll draw 2 cards. You can do this as many times as you can pay for. Darksteel Plate, 3 to cast, 2 to equip. Equip creatures got indestructible. The plate's also indestructible. Illusionist Bracers, 2 to cast, 3 to equip. When an ability of equipped creature is activated, if it isn't a mana ability, copy that ability. You can choose new targets. Swiftfoot Boots, 2 to cast, 1 to equip. Give a creature hexproof and haste. Masterwork of Ingenuity, 1 to cast. You can have it enter the battlefield as a copy of any equipment on the battlefield. So you could have it enter as, say, you couldn't let it enter as a copy because this is a legendary. So never mind. Let it enter as a copy of any equipment that is not legendary. You can let it enter as a copy of legendary equipment, but then immediately one of those is going to die because of the legend rule. Got Blade of Selves, 2 to cast, 4 to equip. To equip, equipped creature has Myriad. So when that creature attacks, it's going to create a copy of itself, attacking each other player. Commander's a multiplayer format. Quietus Spike, 3 to cast, 3 to equip. Equipped creature's got Death Touch. When it deals combat damage to a player, that player loses half his or her life rounded up. Basilisk Collar, 1 to cast, 2 to equip. You're going to give a creature Death Touch and Lifelink. Feather or Fleet Feather Sandals. Excuse me. 2 to cast, 2 to equip. You're going to give a creature Flying and Haste. Okay, the lands in this deck, or the mana base in this deck, there are 33 lands total. We have 10 non-basic lands, being Command Tower. Tap for any color in your commander's color identity. Temple of Mystery. This is one of the scry lands. It enters tapped, but then you scry 1. In the case of the Temple of Mystery, it produces green or blue. Blossoming Sands also enters tapped, but it enters, you gain 1 life. Taps for a green or white. This is one of the bounce lands, Selesnya Sanctuary. He's actually got a couple of bounce lands in here. It enters tapped. When it does, you have to return a land you control to your hand. But then when you tap it on future turns, it produces a green and a white. Azorius Chancery, exact same thing, only produces white and blue. Got Hinterland Harbor, enters tapped unless you control a forest or island. Produces green or blue. Glacial Fortress, exact same thing, only as for plains and island. Produces a white or blue. And then to round out that cycle, we've got Sun Petal Grove for forests and plains, produces a green or white. This one actually should have been with the Blossoming Sands. I didn't catch it. We had 2 from this cycle. Thornwood Falls comes in tapped. You gain 1 life. Taps for a green or blue. The only land we have that produces colorless mana in this deck is Reliquary Tower. But I would say it's in here because then you have no maximum hand size. Tap to add to a colorless, or tap to add a colorless. For basics, Daniel built this with 7 basic plains, 8 basic islands, and 8 basic forests. So if you total up all of the actual sources for each given color, he has 13 sources of white mana, 14 of blue, and 15 of green. So a pretty even mix, but he has a pretty even mix of color needed. So that's it for his deck tech. Daniel, you are a sexy man beast. We all know this. But this commander, I think Wizards figured out that this is just not right. The fact that you can replay your commander multiple times in a commander game, it's made a little more even by the idea of commander tax. So with this as your commander, commander tax does not exist. Well, that's it for the video. As always, the YouTube stuff. Subscribe if you haven't done that. Like and share as well. You can do that multiple times if you see fit. Also, feel free to comment. What you think of the deck. Like I said, this came out of Daniel's own head. It's by no means the only deck of this type ever made, but this is his version. So feel free to tell me what you think about it. I will be sure to pass it on to him. He's a big guy. He can handle the criticism. Or if you love the deck, I'll let him know that as well. In any case, that's it for today. Y'all have a good one, and we will talk to you next time.